I never thought the day would come when I'd find myself staring at something like that. It happened so fast, like a car crash you see in slow motion, but can't avoid. My name is David. I'm 38, and I live in a suburban neighborhood outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, with my wife, Margaret. We've been married for 12 years, and I've always considered myself a lucky man. I'm a financial analyst, she's a teacher, and together, we've built a comfortable life. Our routine was steady, predictable, until that afternoon. It was a Wednesday, and I was in the living room flipping through some paperwork from work when Margaret's voice drifted from the kitchen. She was complaining about her allergies again. It wasn't the first time, and I knew exactly what she needed: tissues. I got up and walked to the closet where she kept her jacket, grabbed it from the coat hook, and slid my hand into the pocket to grab what I knew was there. Instead of tissues, my fingers brushed against a crumpled piece of paper. I pulled it out, my mind absent of any concern, until I saw what it was: a receipt. I flattened it out on the kitchen counter, not thinking much of it at first. But then the words jumped out at me like a punch to the stomach. A luxury hotel logo, bold and unmistakable. And the date, 2 days ago, the same day Margaret had told me she had a work emergency. I stared at the paper, my breath caught in my chest. The receipt listed room service charges, a 2-night stay, 2 adults, a bottle of wine, expensive meals, and in the guest name field, Margaret, and a name I didn't recognize. Derek. My hands trembled as I read over the details again, trying to make sense of it. My mind raced through every conversation we'd had recently. Margaret had told me she was tied up with a work project, a report she had to finish, something urgent. But this, a hotel stay in downtown Raleigh, complete with room service, the discrepancy hit me like a ton of bricks. Why didn't she mention she was going away? Why didn't she say anything about Derek? I felt my stomach twist. Was this a business trip I didn't know about? No, this wasn't business. There was nothing about business in the receipt. It was a personal trip. And Derek? I couldn't think of a single person by that name. Someone she worked with? A friend from her past? I didn't know, but I had to find out. I slid the receipt into my pocket, not ready to confront her yet. No, I couldn't do that. Not yet. This wasn't something I could just ask about on impulse. I needed to gather more. I needed to plan. The confusion and hurt swirling inside me were overwhelming, but I forced myself to remain calm. I walked back to the living room and sat down, pretending nothing was wrong. Margaret came in a few minutes later, still sniffling, asking if I had the tissues. I handed her a box, our normal routine, but I wasn't the same. I couldn't be. I spent the rest of the day pretending everything was fine, but my mind was 1,000 miles away, sorting through the details of that receipt. How had I missed this? What was going on? And more importantly, how was I going to find the answers? It would take time, but I would find out. And when I did, I would make sure she understood the cost of her betrayal. The days after finding that receipt felt like I was walking through fog. Every time I looked at Margaret, my mind replayed the scene from the kitchen, the cold crinkle of the receipt in my hand. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it was a misunderstanding, a mistake, some innocent slip-up. But the more I thought about it, the more things didn't add up. I had to face the truth. I started to think back on the last few months, trying to make sense of everything. Margaret's behavior had shifted gradually, like a slow tide pulling away from the shore. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but the signs had been there. Late nights at work. She'd come home exhausted, hair pulled back in a loose bun, a tired smile on her face. "Sorry, babe, another late meeting," she'd say, and I'd nod, too tired myself to argue. But then there was the gym. She hadn't been much for exercise before, but in the last couple of months, she'd been going almost every day. At first, I thought it was just a phase. She'd been talking about getting in shape, about how good it would feel. But I began to notice her new outfits, tight, sleek, expensive, not the kind of things she used to buy. Margaret wasn't into brands, always careful with money. But now, she had a new wardrobe, and I was the one picking up the tab, no questions asked. It was always just one more class or a couple of things I've been wanting to try. But what hit me hardest was the financial strain. She had started making strange little sacrifices, selling old jewelry, adjusting bills to fit around a suddenly tighter budget. I noticed she was cutting corners in places she never would have before. When I asked her about it, she'd brush it off with a quick, "I'm just getting better at managing things, that's all." I wasn't buying it. I was trying to stay calm. I kept telling myself, don't jump to conclusions. But the more I observed her, the more it became clear that something was off. The laughter in her voice when she talked about work, the extra trips to the gym, the constant urgent phone calls she took in private, none of it felt like it belonged to the woman I had spent the last 12 years with. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't. Something had shifted, and I had a gnawing suspicion that my instincts were right. Margaret was hiding something, someone. And then there was Derek, the name on that hotel receipt. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't know anything about him. I'd never heard her mention a Derek in passing, not once. A coworker, a new friend, I had no idea. But I needed to find out. I didn't want to confront her just yet. No, that would be a mistake. She could lie, weave her way out of anything. I needed proof, something concrete that couldn't be explained away. I knew just who to go to for that. I called Mr. Hartwell, a private investigator I had used once in the past for a business issue. He wasn't cheap, but he was thorough. I told him everything about the receipt, about Margaret's strange behavior, the late nights, the gym visits, the way she was spending money. He agreed to take the case without hesitation, his voice steady, confident. He promised to gather all the information I needed to make sure I knew what was really going on. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange calm wash over me. I wasn't powerless in this. I wasn't going to let her betrayal unravel everything I had built for us without understanding the full picture. I'd learned enough to know that knowledge was power, and now I had a plan. But even as the plan took shape in my mind, a quiet voice nagged at me. The emotional weight of it all was unbearable. Every hour spent waiting for answers felt like an eternity. But I couldn't let my emotions rule me. No, I had to stay sharp, calm, calculated. The pieces were falling into place one by one, and when the truth came out, Margaret wouldn't be able to escape it. Not this time. The first report from Mr. Hartwell arrived on a Wednesday, right when I was sitting down to dinner with Margaret. She chatted away, completely unaware of what was unfolding behind the scenes, while I stared at my phone, the weight of the investigation slowly sinking in. I opened the email, my fingers hovering over the screen. The subject line was simple: Investigation Report, Margaret Green. I clicked it open, and my eyes immediately went to the first set of photos. Margaret, looking casual but well-dressed, walking into a hotel with Derek, the man from the receipt. A momentary shiver ran through me, but I pushed it down. This was only the beginning. The next photo was from inside the hotel, taken at the restaurant. There they were, sitting across from each other, clearly comfortable, laughing. She looked different. Not the reserved, stressed-out Margaret I'd come to know in recent months, but someone carefree, someone at ease. As I scrolled through the rest of the report, it became clear. Mr. Hartwell had captured more than just a few candid shots. He had surveillance footage of Margaret and Derek entering and leaving the hotel room together. Their behavior was unmistakable. Derek's hand on her back as they walked to the elevator, their proximity throughout the evening, it was all there. I stared at the video stills, the images of Margaret looking completely different from the woman I'd known for so many years. The evidence was undeniable. This wasn't just an affair, it was a double life. She had been leading this secret life while I was away at work, trusting her with everything. My love, my time, my resources, and she had been slowly betraying me the entire time. A wave of anger rose in my chest, but I kept it under control. This wasn't the time for outbursts or confronting her in a fit of rage. No, I needed to be methodical, precise. I knew what had to be done, and I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. I leaned back in my chair, taking a deep breath. The affair was one thing, but there was more. It was clear Margaret wasn't just emotionally betraying me, she was using our shared finances to fund her new life with Derek. As I combed through the financial records attached to the report, I saw the transactions she'd made. Frequent hotel bookings, luxury purchases that had started popping up on our credit card statements. The money she had spent on Derek, on their weekend trips together, and on herself, all without so much as a whisper of concern for our future. I glanced at Margaret across the table, oblivious to the storm that was gathering in my mind. I was overwhelmed with the thought of how deep the betrayal ran. Not just the affair, but the financial manipulation, the time stolen from our marriage, the trust she had shredded. She hadn't just broken our vows, she'd taken my financial security and turned it into a tool for her own secret life. But I couldn't let her see any of it. Not yet. I took another look at the report, marking the most significant pieces of evidence: the hotel stays, the purchases, the time frames that matched her work trips. Everything was there, laid out neatly, as clear as day. I wasn't going to let this slide, not after everything I had done for her. She would face the consequences of her actions, and I would make sure of it. I knew the confrontation was coming. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. But I wasn't ready to expose myself, to give her the satisfaction of seeing me shaken. I needed to be in control, to make her understand that she had crossed a line that couldn't be erased with a simple apology. But for now, I had to wait. I had to prepare. The evidence was just the beginning, but it was all I needed to make sure she paid the price for her betrayal. As the night wore on, I sat there, digesting the truth that had been laid out in front of me. No more pretending. No more denial. I was done being the fool. I was ready. The moment I made the decision to contact a lawyer, everything changed. I could no longer be the passive, oblivious husband, the man who blindly trusted. That man was gone. I needed to take control, and the first step was clear. I had to make sure I wasn't just reacting emotionally, but strategically. I scheduled an appointment with Patricia Vance, a divorce attorney known for her aggressive, no-nonsense approach. She was a force in the field, and I'd done my research. If I was going to make sure Margaret faced the consequences of her betrayal, I needed someone who would fight tooth and nail. Her office was minimalist, sharp lines and clean surfaces, a far cry from the homey clutter of our house. I was early, but I didn't mind. I needed a few minutes to calm my nerves. When Patricia walked in, her sharp heels clicked against the tile floor. She had a presence about her, calm, precise, and intimidating. Her handshake was firm, businesslike. "You're here because you need a change," she said, cutting to the heart of the matter. "Tell me everything." And so I did. I told her about Margaret's affair with Derek, the receipt I'd found, the late nights, the gym visits, the financial strain I'd noticed, how she was slowly changing before my eyes, how everything had shifted. I told her about the hotel, the lavish spending, the lies. Patricia nodded as I spoke, her expression stoic, calculating. When I was finished, she leaned back in her chair, eyes focused on me. "We've got a strong case, David," she said, the words cold but reassuring. "We'll make sure she pays for her betrayal." I felt the weight of her words settle over me. It wasn't just about ending the marriage, it was about making her understand the damage she'd done. She had used me, manipulated me, taken advantage of my trust. I wasn't about to let that slide. "You said she's been spending money on Derek," Patricia continued. "We'll track those transactions. Any credit card statements, bank records?" I nodded, already having gathered them. "I've been keeping records. The spending is all over the place. She's been using our joint accounts, no regard for what it's doing to our savings. I've got evidence." Patricia smiled slightly. "Perfect. We'll make sure she's held accountable for every cent she's spent on this affair. But we'll also need to protect your assets. It's clear she's been taking what isn't hers." She began outlining the next steps, her voice smooth and practiced. We'd file for a fault-based divorce, using her infidelity as grounds. We'd make sure to track every dime spent on Derek, and she'd be forced to reimburse me for the funds she misused. "I don't want to just divorce her," I said, my voice lower now, as the reality of what I was about to do sunk in. "I want her to pay. I want her to lose everything she thought she could take from me." Patricia looked at me, her gaze piercing. "You've got the right idea. This isn't just about ending a marriage. This is about making sure she understands the cost of her actions. We'll make sure her reputation is tarnished. She'll pay a heavy price, David." I felt a sick satisfaction settle in my chest. Margaret wouldn't get off lightly. I would make sure of it. She had destroyed the trust in our marriage, and now it was my turn to make her face the consequences. "We'll start by collecting everything," Patricia said, flipping through the papers I'd brought. "But we need to be careful. There's no room for mistakes here. Any misstep, and she could try to argue that the marriage was already on its last legs. We're not giving her that opportunity." I nodded. "I understand. I've already thought this through. I want this to be airtight." Patricia's lips twitched into a small, approving smile. "Good. We'll begin the groundwork tomorrow. I'll take it from here." That night, as I drove home, I felt a strange calm. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't plagued by doubt or second-guessing. I had a plan. I had a path forward. And as Margaret sat on the couch, oblivious to everything I'd just set in motion, I realized I was no longer the man she had been playing. I was done being her fool. I watched her get ready for the evening, the same way she had so many times before. Margaret stood in front of the mirror, running her fingers through her hair, adjusting her blouse. She was preparing for another client dinner, or at least that's what she had told me. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at it quickly before slipping it into her purse, smoothing out the creases on her dress and taking one last look in the mirror. "Are you sure you'll be okay here?" she asked, her voice a little too sweet, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. "I'm fine," I replied, my tone controlled, unwavering. "Go ahead. I'll be here." She smiled, a little too brightly, and kissed me on the cheek, the same kiss she always gave before she left. I couldn't help but notice how stiff it was, how forced. She didn't know that I had already seen the evidence of what she was doing, but I wasn't going to let her know that just yet. The timing had to be perfect, and for now, patience was key. I watched her walk out of the door, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor as she left for her dinner with Derek. The same Derek who had appeared on that hotel receipt. The same Derek who had stolen her heart and my trust. As she disappeared into the night, I sat back in my chair and let out a slow breath. I had prepared for this moment. Every piece of evidence I had collected, every conversation I had overheard, every night I had spent in silence, processing the crushing weight of her betrayal, had led me here. I was ready for the confrontation, ready to expose everything for what it was. And yet, as I sat there, with the divorce papers in my desk drawer, the calm feeling that washed over me wasn't just the satisfaction of knowing that the truth would come to light soon, it was the certainty that I had control. It wasn't her deception that held the power anymore. It was mine. I reflected on how carefully I had planned every step of this. I'd been meticulous about gathering the evidence, about hiring Mr. Hartwell, about consulting with Patricia Vance. Nothing was left to chance. When the moment came to confront her, it would be surgical, precise. No room for escape, no chance for her to manipulate the situation. As the hours passed, I felt the anticipation building in me. Margaret had no idea that tonight, as she sat across the table from Derek, she was about to lose everything. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. Not after all the years of loyalty, the trust I had invested in our marriage, the time I had spent working tirelessly to build the life we had. I could almost picture the conversation in my mind, the way it would unfold. Margaret would come home later, full of excuses, her defenses already ready, but I wasn't going to give her the chance to control the narrative. I had the upper hand now, and I wasn't going to let her talk her way out of this one. Every lie she told, every deceit she tried to weave would only dig her deeper into the hole I was about to expose. I didn't even need to confront her with anger. I didn't need to shout or cry or beg her to explain herself. All I had to do was present the evidence. The photos, the hotel stays, the financial records, the videos, and watch as the life she had built around her affair crumbled. I knew the truth would hurt her, but it wasn't just about hurting her. It was about making sure she faced the consequences of her actions. Margaret had chosen Derek over me, over our life together. She had stolen time from our marriage and used our finances to fund her affair. And now it was time for her to understand that nothing was free. My phone buzzed on the table, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a message from Patricia. "Everything's in place. We'll be ready to move forward once you're ready. Remember, stay calm, stay collected. This is your moment." I read the message again, feeling the finality of it settle in. The legal battle would begin soon. Margaret had no idea how deep the hole she had dug for herself was, but she would find out soon enough. As I sat back in my chair, I couldn't help but think about how much had changed. The man who had once been naive, who had believed in unconditional trust and love, was no more. That man was gone, replaced by someone who valued self-respect and accountability. Someone who had finally learned that family didn't mean being someone's doormat. Tonight, the calm before the storm would end, and I would face Margaret with everything I had uncovered. And for the first time in a long while, I would walk into a room and know that I was no longer the victim of her lies. The hotel lobby was nearly empty when I arrived, save for a couple of tourists sipping coffee in the corner. The tall glass windows allowed the late afternoon sun to filter in, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. I checked my watch. 6:45 p.m. Margaret and Derek should be arriving soon. I wasn't here to make a scene. No shouting, no tears, no dramatic confrontation. That wouldn't do. I had already seen how her lies worked, how she could twist the truth, play the victim, and spin a web of manipulation. I wasn't giving her that chance. I took a seat in the lounge area, making sure to keep my distance from the front desk where the staff could easily spot me. The plan was simple: observe, wait, and then strike when the time was right. As I watched people come and go, I let the silence settle over me. It was strange, really. I had been so consumed by anger and betrayal in the last few days, but now, in this moment, I felt nothing. No rage, no sadness, just calm. Cold, deliberate calm. A few minutes later, Margaret walked in, her heels clicking against the floor, her eyes scanning the lobby. She was dressed as she always did for these client dinners, a chic, tailored dress that hugged her figure in all the right places. Her makeup was perfect, her smile warm and genuine, but it was all a facade. Beneath that carefully crafted exterior, I knew what she had been hiding. She had no idea I was here, but I could see her scanning the room, probably hoping to spot Derek first, trying to stay composed. And then he appeared, Derek. Casual, yet confident, his gait almost too relaxed. He was wearing a simple jacket, but there was something about the way he looked at Margaret, an intimacy in his gaze, that made it clear their relationship wasn't just professional. They exchanged a quick kiss on the cheek, both of them acting like it was just another night out. They smiled at one another, and I saw the way their chemistry sparked between them, the easy familiarity of two people who had long passed the point of casual acquaintance. Margaret laughed at something Derek said, and I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. It wasn't just an affair, it was real for her. I leaned back in my chair, taking it all in. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to lose control. I simply had to wait for them to go upstairs, then follow. The confrontation would be quick, sharp, and final. They walked towards the elevator, hands brushing as they spoke in low voices. As they got inside and the doors closed, I took a deep breath and stood up, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. I walked toward the elevator with purpose, my steps echoing in the quiet lobby. The elevator dinged as it arrived at the floor, and I stepped off just as they reached their hotel room. I paused for a moment to gather my thoughts. This wasn't just about ending a marriage. This was about ensuring she never had a chance to escape responsibility. It was about making her see the full extent of the betrayal. I knocked on the door, waiting in the silence that followed. There was a moment of stillness. Then, the lock clicked. Margaret opened the door, her face turning pale the moment she saw me standing there. Her eyes widened in shock, and I watched her instinctively step back, as if she wanted to hide from what was happening. "David," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "What are you—" I cut her off. "We need to talk." Behind her, Derek stood, his eyes darting between Margaret and me, clearly caught in the middle. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights, unsure of how to react. But I wasn't here for him. I wasn't here for some confrontation with him. This was between me and Margaret, and she knew it. I stepped into the room without waiting for an invitation. "You've been lying to me," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You've been lying about where you've been, what you've been doing. You've been lying to me about who you've been with." Margaret opened her mouth to say something, but I held up a hand, cutting her off once again. "I don't need you to explain yourself. I've already seen everything. The receipts, the photos, the footage. I know about you and Derek." Her face crumbled as the reality hit her. I could see the panic begin to set in, but there was no sympathy left in me for her. This was the woman I had trusted, the woman I had built a life with, and now she was standing here with her affair exposed for the world to see. I didn't," she stammered, her voice shaky. But the words fell apart before they could even form. "Don't try to lie your way out of this," I said coldly, pulling out the divorce papers from my jacket. "This is done. It's over. You'll sign these, and we'll settle everything from here." I handed her the papers, watching her fingers tremble as she took them. Derek, still standing by the door, shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flicking between Margaret and me. He opened his mouth to say something, but I turned to him, my gaze sharp. "You're not going to get away with this either," I said, my voice hard. "Both of you will face the consequences of what you've done. You'll both be held accountable for the damage you've caused." Margaret's breathing quickened, her panic now palpable. She looked at Derek, then back at me, but there was nothing left for her to say. The truth had already come out. "You will sign these papers," I said, more firmly this time, "or I'll make sure the public knows everything. Everything." Margaret nodded, barely able to hold back the tears now, but there was nothing left for her to hide behind. She had been caught, and she knew it. The affair, the lies, it was all out in the open now. Derek, looking defeated, turned and quietly left the room. I didn't need to say anything more to him. The damage was already done. Margaret stared at the divorce papers for a long moment. and then, finally, her shoulders slumped in resignation. "I'm sorry, David," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But I didn't care for her apology anymore. It was too late. "I know," I said, turning on my heel and walking out of the room. "Sign the papers, Margaret. It's over." Margaret came home later than usual that night. I had expected as much. After everything that had happened, I knew she would do everything in her power to avoid facing the consequences. She opened the front door quietly, almost nervously, and I could hear her footsteps echoing through the hall as she walked toward the living room. She was trying to be casual, but I wasn't fooled. She knew what was coming. I was waiting for her in my office, the light from my desk lamp casting a cold glow over the paperwork spread out in front of me. The divorce settlement documents, the records of her spending, everything I needed to ensure she couldn't escape the fallout from her actions. It was all there, neatly organized and ready to go. Margaret stood in the doorway, a hesitant smile on her face. "David," she said, her voice soft but strained, "can we talk about what happened?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I took a moment to study her. The woman who had been my partner for so long now stood in front of me, wearing the mask of someone who had just been caught in the most humiliating betrayal of her life. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was something about her expression that seemed more resigned than remorseful. "I've been thinking about what you said," she continued, her voice wavering. "I never meant to hurt you, David. I don't know what happened." I looked at her, unmoved. "No, Margaret. You knew exactly what was happening. You were careful. You hid it well. You thought I wouldn't find out, didn't you?" Her face tightened. She stepped into the room, moving closer to me, but I didn't budge. I wasn't about to let her manipulate me with her tears or her excuses. She had already had too many chances to make things right, and she had chosen Derek over me. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never meant for things to get so out of control." "Out of control?" I repeated, the bitterness creeping into my voice. "You've been living a double life, Margaret. You've been lying to me, stealing from our future, and now you want to act like you're the one who's been wronged?" She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up my hand, stopping her. "I'm not interested in your excuses," I said, my voice calm and firm. "You've made your bed, and now it's time to lie in it. You don't get to manipulate me anymore. You don't get to play the victim after everything you've done." Her eyes began to fill with tears, but I could see the defiance still flickering behind them. She was trying to hold on to the power she had, but it was slipping away. I wasn't the man she could manipulate anymore. I wasn't the man who would forgive and forget. I had already made my decision. I reached into the drawer of my desk and pulled out the divorce papers. I slid them across the table toward her, watching as she took a deep breath and stared at the document in front of her. The reality of it was sinking in, but there was no turning back now. "You'll sign these tonight?" I said quietly. "And when you do, I'll make sure everything is settled. You'll get a fraction of what you think you deserve. You'll get nothing more." She stared at the papers, her hand trembling as she reached for them. The tears she had been holding back finally spilled over, and her voice cracked as she spoke. "David, please. I didn't mean for it to end like this. I love you." The words hung in the air between us, but I wasn't moved. I didn't believe her anymore. The woman I loved, the woman I had spent so many years with, was gone. In her place stood someone who had destroyed everything we had built, all for a fleeting affair. "You don't love me, Margaret," I said softly, my voice steady. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. If you loved me, you would have respected what we had." She was silent for a long moment, her shoulders shaking with the weight of what she had lost. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to fix this." "You can't fix it," I said, my voice cold. "What's broken is broken, and there's no going back." Margaret let out a small sob, but I refused to soften. I had seen her for who she really was, and I wouldn't let her manipulate me into feeling sorry for her. By the time the night was over, she had signed the papers. I could see the defeat in her eyes as she handed them back to me. She had nothing left to say. I didn't let her stay. I didn't want to be in the same house with her any longer. I handed her the settlement offer, outlining the terms, and watched as she packed her things. The woman who had once been my partner, my confidant, was now a stranger. She had no place in my life anymore. I sat back in my chair, staring at the signed papers. It was over. The weight I had been carrying for months, the hurt, the betrayal, was finally starting to lift. I had done what needed to be done. Margaret had tried to make me feel sorry for her, but I couldn't. I had seen her true colors. She had made her choices, and now I would make mine. By morning, she was gone. I was left with nothing but the faintest echo of the woman I had once loved. And as I sat there, alone in the office, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was free, and I wasn't going to look back. It had been 3 weeks since the confrontation, 3 weeks since the hotel, the divorce papers, the final breaking point in what had once been a marriage full of promises. And now, here I was, standing in front of Patricia Vance's office, holding the final settlement documents in my hand, ready for the last stage of this ugly process to be wrapped up. The sound of heels clicking against marble floors echoed in the hallway as Patricia emerged from her office. She smiled as she approached me, her usual confidence radiating from her every movement. She had been instrumental in making sure everything went according to plan, ensuring that Margaret would feel the full weight of the consequences for her actions. "David," she greeted me warmly, her eyes scanning my face for any hint of emotion. There were none. My calm was now permanent. "Everything set?" I asked, my voice steady. Patricia nodded, leading me into her office. "Margaret's been served with the final papers. The settlement's been drawn up. She'll get a fraction of what she was hoping for. The financials are clear, and your case for reimbursement has been built solidly. She has no room to argue. We've got the public humiliation angle covered too. Her reputation is already in tatters." I felt a strange satisfaction in hearing the words, but I kept my emotions in check. This wasn't about feeling good. It was about making sure that Margaret would never think she could get away with this kind of betrayal again. "She's going to be moving back to Ohio, isn't she?" I asked. Patricia nodded. "Yes, with nothing but the bare minimum. She's agreed to leave quietly to avoid any more damage to her reputation. It's all in the settlement." I stood up from the chair and paced the room, trying to hold back the flood of thoughts that threatened to overwhelm me. I had seen her life, the life she'd built with me, crumble in an instant. The evidence, the legal action, the financial fallout, it was all part of the plan to ensure she couldn't escape what she had done. "Good," I said, finally stopping in front of Patricia's desk. "I don't want her to walk away from this thinking she won." "She won't," Patricia replied confidently, pushing a stack of documents in front of me. "Sign here, and it's done. The media won't get involved unless she tries to fight. But with everything we've gathered, she'll back off. This is your final victory, David. It's over." I took the pen and signed the papers without hesitation, the sharp click of the ink against the document marking the end of everything that had been. No more secrets, no more lies, no more pretending. Margaret's world would fall apart, and I had ensured that she would be held accountable for every dollar she'd spent on her affair, for every moment she had stolen from our marriage. "I never expected it to end like this," I said quietly, mostly to myself, as I signed the last page. "But I guess I never really knew her." Patricia's eyes softened for a moment, but only for a moment. "People are capable of doing terrible things, David. It's not your fault she betrayed you." I paused. It was strange hearing someone else validate my feelings, even if it was only for a second. But I had moved past the anger and the hurt. I had done what needed to be done. I had played my part in this drama, and now it was time to move on. The rest of the process was a blur. A few days later, I received the news that Margaret had accepted the settlement. She'd left quietly, packing her things and moving back to Ohio, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a damaged reputation. Her friends, what was left of them, had scattered, and Derek, I suspected, had disappeared into his own life, far from the wreckage he had left behind. By the time I signed the final paperwork to close everything, I felt an unexpected sense of freedom. No guilt, no remorse, only the knowledge that I had done what was necessary. It was the end of the relationship, the final chapter, but it was also the beginning of something new, something for me. The next few days passed in a blur of work and reflection. The emptiness in our home, once a place of shared memories, felt strangely liberating. I had no more ties, no more obligations to a woman who had torn everything apart. Margaret was gone, and now I could focus on myself, on rebuilding what she had destroyed. And as I sat in my apartment, organizing my thoughts for the future, I found that I was no longer bound by the fear or the guilt that once held me captive. I was free, truly free. 6 months had passed since everything had fallen apart. I was sitting in a small but cozy apartment I had recently moved into, a place all my own, free from the memories of Margaret and the suffocating weight of betrayal. The walls were still bare, but it felt like a fresh start. A blank slate where I could breathe again. I looked around, taking it all in. My new life was simple, but I didn't need anything extravagant. The things that had once seemed important, luxury cars, status symbols, all the shiny things I'd thought I needed to prove myself, were meaningless now. I didn't need them anymore. All I needed was peace. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a message from Patricia Vance, the lawyer who had been instrumental in securing my victory. I had spent months focused on the legal side of things, ensuring that Margaret would pay for the damage she had caused. But now, I was ready to let go. I opened the message. Everything's officially settled. Your ex is moving back to Ohio. No more surprises. I felt a strange sense of closure, but not the kind I had expected. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't looking for revenge. Margaret's life had been shattered, and there was nothing left for me to do but move on. It was over. I was free. As I set my phone down, I heard a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated for a moment before walking over. When I opened it, I was greeted by the warm, friendly smile of Jennifer, a real estate attorney I had met through a mutual friend a few weeks ago. "Hey," she said, her voice bright and casual. "I hope I'm not interrupting." I smiled back, surprised at how easy it felt to be around her. "No, not at all. Come in." She stepped inside, holding a small bag in her hand. "I brought you something," she said, handing it to me. "I know you've been busy, but I thought maybe you could use a break." I raised an eyebrow as I opened the bag. It was a small bottle of wine and a couple of glasses. Simple, but thoughtful. "You're a good one, aren't you?" I teased, grinning as I placed the bottle on the counter. Jennifer laughed, shrugging. "I try. Besides, I figured after everything, you deserve to relax. Life's been a little rough for you, huh?" I didn't have to think too long before answering. "You could say that, but it's all in the past now. I'm just focused on moving forward." Jennifer's eyes softened, and she stepped closer. "You've done a good job of that, I can tell." I nodded, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known I could have again. It felt like a long time since I had truly believed in the possibility of new beginnings. But now, with Jennifer here, it didn't feel like something distant. It felt like a reality I was starting to embrace. We opened the wine and settled on the couch, the conversation flowing easily between us. We talked about work, about life, about the small things that make up the everyday moments. There was no pretense, no performance. It was just honest, refreshing. As we sat there, enjoying the simplicity of the evening, I reflected on how much I had changed. Not just in terms of what had happened with Margaret, but in how I viewed relationships now. I'd spent so long trusting without question, without truly seeing the person I was with. Now, I valued transparency, accountability, people who didn't hide behind masks or lies. Jennifer was everything I had been looking for in a partner, not perfect, but real, honest. And for the first time in a long while, I felt hope. "I think we should do this again," Jennifer said, her smile warm as she looked at me. I nodded, my heart light. "I think that's a great idea." The weight of my past had faded, replaced by something new and full of potential. Margaret's betrayal had almost destroyed me, but it had also forced me to look at myself and what I wanted from life. I had learned to trust again, not blindly, but with intention. And that felt like a solid foundation to build something real on. As Jennifer laughed at something I said, the sound of her voice filled the room, and I realized just how far I had come. The man I had been, the trusting, naive husband, was gone. In his place stood someone who knew his worth, who valued honesty and self-respect. This was my new beginning, a life free from deceit, free from betrayal, a life where I could be myself and be loved for who I was, not for a performance. And that was enough.